is currently preparing for a half marathon. That's coming up at the beginning of November in 2 weeks' time. And it's going to be such a great achievement. And to help support her, to help encourage her along in this, I've been going out for runs with her on the weekends. And as of 2 weeks ago, we've officially run the furthest I think we've ever run non-stop in our whole lives, which was 19K. Which I know for some of you here who are runners, that's just a warm-up. But I was really proud of both Beth and myself for doing that. As you can see, I often finish our runs looking a lot more sweaty and disheveled, and she just looks slightly pink and feels like she could just go on for ages. But after doing this 19K run, I think I've got two reflections from it. And the first is I feel like I've had a glimpse into what old age is going to be like. Because why did nobody tell me like my knees would hurt this much? I got a glimpse of myself getting out of bed in the mirror, and I look just like my 99-year-old nan who struggles to get out of bed every morning. Thankfully, I'm young enough that I can still sit on the stairs and slide down instead of having to be stuck at the top because I can't bend my legs. But my other takeaway, my other reflection, is that 10 kilometers is more than enough for a run. Anything else is just too long and it's unnecessary, and I don't know why people do it. But as we were running along just coming out of Sefton Park, and we were just about to go into Otterspool into the little woodlands, and I just had this thought. I was like, I am so bored. And as I run with my phone in my hand, so I thought, let me just have a quick look to see how far we've gone. And when I looked, it was not long after the 10K mark. And I was like, my body just knew. I was like, we've exercised, we've exerted ourselves. We've been running for ages. Why are we still going? And thankfully, I play Pokemon Go as we run. So I had that to keep me going as we went along the run, because, you've got to catch them all. But then I also knew that I had a nice, warm, hot bath waiting for me when I got to the finish line. But also, when I got home. And I know it was going to be worth it when, Beth does a half marathon, but for me, that bath was that main driver for getting home then. But today we're looking at the final couple of chapters of the book of Joshua. And up until this point, the people of Israel, they had been on a very long journey themselves. Maybe slightly longer than 19K, but still a long journey. And they had been slaves in Egypt for well over 400 years until God sent a guy called Moses to come and lead them out. And you can read more about that in the book of Exodus, or you can watch the DreamWorks movie, Prince of Egypt, which is a 10 out of 10 movie. So I do recommend that if you've got the time. But as they leave Egypt, we have this miraculous story of God parting the Red Sea, where God allows them to walk through the middle on dry land so that they can escape from Pharaoh and from his men that are trying to chase them back down and bring them into slavery. And then they make it out of there, and they make it into the wilderness, into the desert, and they live there for 40 years. And throughout this time, God provides for them all that they need, from food, from water, to protection. Even his presence is amongst them whilst they're living out there. And they get to the end of these 40 years, and they arrive at the land of Canaan. And this is the promised land that God had swore to their ancestors many, many years ago. And it's described as a land that's flowing with milk and honey because of its abundance, because of how rich and fertile the land would be. But by the time they get here, Moses, who had been leading them, he is now an old man. He's about to die. But just before he does, he hands the baton of leadership over to this guy called Joshua. And the message that he has for the people, that God has for the people, is be ready. Because God is going to give us the land that he has promised us. He's going to give us victories over our enemies. And as we read through the book of Joshua, this is exactly what happens. They go in and they take the land. They defeat all who stand against them. And when they have won the battles and driven them all out, they then divide the land amongst the 12 tribes of Israel. I practiced that so many times, and I just keep it, the 12 tribes of Israel. But the 12 tribes of Israel. And by the time we get to chapter 23, we're told that a long time has passed and that they've finally been living in a time of peace and rest, which is lovely. And Joshua, who had been leading them through this conquest, he's now an old man himself. And he's lived a good and eventful life, but he's on his deathbed and he's about to die. And chapter 23 is titled Joshua's Farewell. And it almost feels that by the time we get to the close of the next chapter, we should be expecting it to end with and they lived happily ever after. But instead, what we have is Joshua. He gathers all the leaders of the tribes together. And the words that he has for them is more along the lines of, I've had a good run, but now you guys need to be ready for what's ahead, because the journey continues and God still has more in store for you. So we're going to read a bit of that. And this is what Joshua says to the leaders in Joshua 23, verses 3 to 5. He says, you yourself have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I've allotted as an inheritance for you, your tribes, all the land of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you, and you will take possession of their land, as the Lord your God has promised you. And though the people have been living in the land for the past 25 years now, they hadn't fully taken possession of all the land that God was given to them. And though it was divided amongst the tribes on paper or papyrus or stone or whatever they were using, it was now their duty and their time to go and claim that land, to drive out the other nations that are currently living there and fully inhabit it. And at first glance, it can be easy to think that Joshua's main concern for them was to finish this job of fully inhabiting the land. But if we dig a little bit deeper, we see his focus is directed somewhere else. We're going to read on verse 6. And he says, be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, without turning aside to the right or to the left. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their God or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them, but you are to hold fast to the Lord your God, as you have until now. The Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day, no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000, because the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. At the heart of what Joshua is trying to communicate to those before him is that their number one priority should be their faithfulness to God. He reminds the tribe leaders that it wasn't by their own military might that they were able to drive out their enemies and take the land, but it was because of God's mighty hand. And the only reason that they're there where they are today is because of God's power, not their own. And it isn't because of a desire for the land that the Israelites should be faithful and then God will give it to them. But it's because of their desire to be faithful that the land will be given to them as an outpouring of God's blessing. So as we think about our own context here in 2024, what can we learn from these last few chapters of Joshua, what it means to grow and remain as faithful individuals, as a faithful community to God? Well, number one, we remember that God was faithful first. In business or in goal setting, they often say it's in knowing our why that we're able to find our motivation. We're able to find our focus or our passion. You know, and in running that 19K, my why wasn't to be catching more Pokemon. Because if that was the case, I could have just stopped when I got tired, or maybe better yet, I could have just went for a nice leisurely stroll around the park for half an hour. Or if I was being really lazy, I could say to Beth, hey, let's jump in the car. You drive me around at about 10 miles an hour where they still think you're walking. Not that I've done that before. But my why there, it wasn't to catch Pokemon, but it was to support Beth in her training so that she's ready for a half marathon. And that is why I could push on to finish the run. It's why I can keep going every week. So why are we faithful? It's because God was faithful first. As we read from the very beginning of chapter 23, but also through the whole of chapter 24, Joshua is recounting to the people all that God has done for them. He's drawing their attention to the mighty things, the faithful God who's freed them out of slavery, that sustained them throughout the wilderness and gave them the victories as they fought their way through the land of Canaan. And Joshua reminds them that they can continue to put their trust and their faith in God, because they can look back at all they have been through, and they can see that he has provided for them at every opportunity. And just as he's done it before, he will do it again. Because you see, God isn't sat back just waiting for us to take this blind step of faith. He demonstrates his love for us because that is his nature. He demonstrates his goodness and his care for us because that is the nature of God. And as we look through the Bible, we see countless stories of God's goodness, of his faithfulness to his people. We see the character and the nature of God revealed to us so that we can know where our trust is placed. We see it at the very beginning of creation. In Genesis 1, the very first chapter, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food." After God created mankind, out of his faithfulness, out of his love and his good nature, the very next thing that he does is bless them. He gives them purpose. He provides for them. And this is all before they can do anything to serve him. He is a God that blesses and outpours that blessing. And he further demonstrates his faithfulness in the life and sacrifice of Jesus. The only way up until that point you could be considered part of the people of God was to be born Jewish. But Jesus came to the Jew and to the Gentile. He came to reconcile the whole world and the whole of creation back to him, back into right relationship with God. In John 3:16, one of the most famous Bible passages there is, it tells us, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." When Jesus came, he came and took all of our sins, all of our shame, all of our burdens upon himself when he was crucified on the cross. All so that we could be forgiven, all that we could once again come back into relationship with God the Father. He was the ultimate sacrifice. And then 3 days later, he rose again. He won the victory over death that sin brings. And instead of that death, Jesus came and offered us an everlasting life. This is the gospel. This is the good news. The gospel literally means good news. And the good news is that as he gives us this life, it's free. It's not something that can be earned. It's not something that can be bought. But when Jesus came, he came to give this freely, and it's available to all. You see, God time and time again demonstrates his faithfulness. And it's in this, it calls us to respond in a place of faithful obedience. God was faithful first, so our correct response is one of worship. And secondly, we keep our eye on the prize. After Joshua reminded the people of all God has done for them, he then reminds them of the covenant that they made with God. This was the sacred promise that God would make with the Israelites, one that would mean that God says, "You are my chosen people." The promise that he would bless them and he would protect them, all as long as they promised to worship and serve him and him alone, and that they would follow all of his commandments. And there was also this reminder, as much as God would keep the promise of blessing, he'd also keep this promise of destruction should they turn away from him, should they walk away from God. For the Israelites, the prize that Joshua wanted them to keep their eye on is their relationship and their covenant with God. And in chapter 24, we see the people cry out adamantly. They say, "We will be faithful." They say, "Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods." And when Joshua pushes back and he says that you aren't able to serve the Lord, they say, "No, we will serve the Lord." And it's because of this, because of their adamant and steadfast faith, that they renew their covenant with God. And we here, 2,000 and odd years later, we're given this same opportunity for a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. He invites us into relationship with him. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2 says, "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith." When learning to ride a motorbike, one of the things that they impress on you is this issue of target fixation. That's when you become so focused on the thing that you're trying to avoid or the thing that you're looking at that it's most likely, it's inevitable you start steering towards it. Because as your head makes the minor adjustments, your body does as well. And even though it's so minute, it means that your body moves the steering wheel. Inevitably, you just start driving towards that thing. And the thing that they tell you over and over again is to look where you want to go, not at what you want to avoid. And that way, you'll be more successful in actually avoiding the thing. Hebrew tells us to throw off the things that hinder or entangle us. And sometimes the sin and the distractions in our lives, they can be obvious hindrances with our walk in Christ, whether it be chasing after our own selfish desires for wealth, fame, power. Perhaps it's choosing to scroll on Instagram and TikTok instead of reading our Bibles. Or it's harboring the hate for our enemy or sometimes our friend down the road from us. And as we keep our eyes focused on these things, we slowly start to drift away from Jesus. For me, something that I've struggled with ever since I was young is the area of lust. Whether it be watching things I know deep down I probably shouldn't be watching, or chasing after girls in an unhealthy way. And sometimes it's as simple as letting my mind just run away with the thoughts that definitely don't bring me closer to Jesus. And even now, there are certain apps that I know I can't have on my phone because there are just too many temptations. There are shows that I know I can't watch because they're the things that spark the thoughts in my mind. And if I do, it's just gonna get carried away. And it's an area I continually have to bring back to God. I need to keep my eyes fixed on him, because if I entertain those thoughts, even though initially they can seem like such small and harmless things, but as time goes on, as I slowly find myself focusing on them, I slowly find my way drifting away from God. And before I realize it, those small steps have added up, and the distance is so much bigger than I originally thought. But other times, the distractions can be a lot more nuanced. When Alex's mentor, Carl Cole, was here from the States, the staff team, we had a dinner with him, and in the evening we were chatting away, and he said something that really challenged me. And he said, sometimes we can be lazy in our working. I looked at him and I was like, what are you talking about? I definitely don't feel lazy when I work, because I don't want to work, so what are you talking about? But what he meant by that was sometimes we know that we have an important task to do. And for me, it's most likely it's setting time aside to read and pray and write my sermons. But yet I can often find other several jobs that also need doing at the same time. And they might not be as important. They're still important. They're just not as important of that job I should be doing. But I can take myself away and think, oh, I just need to do this. I can fill out this rota. I can message this person to go for a coffee just for a little catch-up. Because it's good things to do, but I'm not then setting my time aside as I should be. And whilst that was about work, I think the same can be said for our spiritual lives as well. We can take something important like spending our own personal time with Jesus, allowing him to speak to us directly. Maybe setting some time aside to pray or read our Bibles. And we can find it replacing it with, well, I hear a sermon on Sunday, so, I'll be able to hear God speak then. And whilst hearing God speak through others is a good thing, a very good thing, we can learn a lot from other people. We can have new insights, new wisdom shared with us, something that we would never have thought of. But God is wanting a relationship with each and every single one of us. He wants to speak to us directly, speak to us personally, and spend that time with us. It's like hearing of what's going on in the lives of celebrities. We can watch interviews, we can hear their words, we can know intimate details of their lives. But that doesn't mean that we have a relationship with them. God wants to have a personal relationship with each of us. Or maybe we take things like our marriage or kids or friendships, and we replace them as the main focus instead of Jesus. And whilst these relationships are super important, when our main focus is Jesus, our whole life is able to flourish. It says that Jesus offers us life in all of its abundance. And when we're rooted and we're filled up by Jesus, then we're able to have that be poured into, and then we're able to pour out into others from that place. All these other areas are able to flourish because we're in the love of God. We must fix our eyes on Jesus, and as we do, we can faithfully persevere into a life that he's leading us into, and it's one of abundance. And number three, we also remember that we're not alone. And we're not alone because firstly, we have one another. You know, Joshua knew and he understood that the mission and the full promise of God was not his alone to carry. And he was going to far outlive him. Now, he was getting old and he told them plainly, I am about to die soon. And he was more than okay with that. And I'm sure at 110 years old, many of us would be too. But he wasn't precious about holding on to the baton of leadership that was passed on to him. But he was ready to commission the next generation of leaders that were there before him. One thing I love about the church is that it brings in such a diverse group of people. Diverse in age, in culture, backgrounds, professions, wealth, hobbies, interests. And it can often feel like a real ragtag bunch of people that we come together, but all united around Jesus. And there's something special about the church community as well, unlike almost anywhere else, because we don't just meet for a purpose and then just go about our business. But when we come into church, we're called into a church family in which we do life together, where we're able to invest and encourage one another as we go through our life. And another beautiful thing that comes out of this is the intergenerational relationships that are being built and nurtured as well. Where we have younger generations who are coming up, they have people who they can look up to, older Christians or someone just in the next life stage to where they are. That they're able to see the youth are able to see students are able to see older adults, and older adults, slightly older adults. They're able to be inspired by stories of the past, of the goodness and the faithfulness of God. They're able to keep pressing on in their faith. And it isn't just a one-way route of encouragement either. I was having a chat with someone who was visiting the church a couple of weeks ago, and they were here in the evening, and they looked around, and they asked, what on earth is going on here? He's like, why are there so many young people? Is it something that we're doing here? Is it something that God's doing? He's like, what is it? And I said, to be honest, I think it's a multiple mixture of things. I think God is definitely doing something here in our student ministry. He's definitely doing something in students across the UK, across the world. I was in Manchester CU last week, and it was amazing to see a room full of people. Back when I was in CU, we might have had maybe 25 on a good day, but this room was packed with about 50, and they were telling me that, this is a bit of a slow day for us because everyone's ill or got deadlines. And I was just in awe to see so many people on fire for God. God is definitely doing something. And I think the team here, when they came up 4 years ago, they really, really curated a space where young people can come. They focused on the younger generation so that they can have this space to encounter God, to meet with him. And they're definitely doing something. But I also think it's you students that are here today. They play a massive part in it. We're so good. I say we, I'm not a student. You guys are so good at inviting people to church. So good at turning up, but also so good at being people who are just hungry for God, who are ready to chase after him and excited to see what he's going to be doing and how you can encounter him. And I shared to this guy that it's been such a challenge and a kick up the bum for both myself, for other members of the team, because we're seeing students who are chasing after God. It's in such an incredible way, and it's not about us curating a space. We often feel like we're having to play catch-up. We're learning and relearning from them what it looks like to come to God in worship, to seek after him in prayer and petition, to share the gospel, the good news with our friends. Like Joshua, we need to be ready to pass the baton on because the mission is God's. It's far going to outlive every single one of us, whether we like it or not. But in our faithfulness, we just have to play our part. Play our part here and now and raising up the next generation, encouraging one another, supporting one another, being ready to learn from each other. And secondly, and the most important reason, we're not alone because God is with us. John 16, 15 and 16 says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and be with you forever. And this advocate is the Holy Spirit. He is our helper. He's our comforter, our friend who intercedes on our behalf. And the beauty of this is as we run the race that is set out for us, we're not strong enough to do it by ourselves. When we feel weak, or we feel broken, or maybe when we just don't feel good enough, God comes alongside of us. It's just like this video in the 1992 Olympics. Runner Derek Redmond, he sets off running, and as he's running, he then pulls his hamstring early on into the race. And he's in a lot of pain, but he's determined to finish the race. And he tries to push on, he keeps running, but the pain is just too much. But then somewhere out of the crowd, we see this man who pushes past. He bursts past the steward and runs alongside him. And Derek sees the man and recognizes him, and it's his father, Jim Redmond. And he wraps his arms around him, and he's crying into his shoulders. But then Jim helps carry him over the finish line. And it's one of the most heartwarming and heart-wrenching stories and scenes that we've seen in the Olympics. But how much more does God our Father love us? We can't do it in our own strength. But when we lean and we trust on God, He will carry us through. The Bible tells us that He will never leave us or forsake us. But He hears our cries. He's with us in the good times and the bad. And it can often feel like when we're on top of the world, that's when we can feel God the closest to us. We feel Him the most. It's so easy and it's so obvious to see. But then when the storms of life come in, when things get difficult, and we begin to ask, God, where are you? Where are you in the midst of this? Why have you left me? But the truth is, God is right there with us. He feels our hurt, He feels our pain, and He invites us into His loving arms. He doesn't leave us in the hopes that we'll just figure it out by ourselves, that we'll see Him on the other side maybe. But He's there for us to cry into His shoulders as He carries us and He leads us through. God is faithful to us time and time again. And our appropriate response to this is one of worship. We must fix our eyes on Jesus where we find our everlasting life. And as we run the race before us, we encourage one another. We lean on God, trust that He is our strength and our sustainer. What are those things in our lives that are stopping us from being faithful to God? What are the things that are drawing our attention away from Him? And how are we able to refocus on Him when those things, those distractions are there? How do we turn back to Him? For me, when dealing with those issues of lust, one of the things that I found most valuable was having those close, trusted friends alongside me. The ones who I knew I could talk to about it no matter what I'm going through. Being able to have them there for that accountability, to offer me challenge, to check me when I know I'm not doing something I should be doing. But also to check in, to say, how are you doing? How can I pray for you? How can I support you? And also for me to do the same for them as well. And when I'm struggling, I know I can pick up the phone and give them a call because they're going to be there for me. How we do that here is trios. Where you and maybe two other people, we gather together. It's a judgment-free space where you can support each other. You can walk alongside each other in a much deeper and more intentional way. And as we journey through life together, we have those friends who we know, that when they know the trouble that we're facing, who can sit in all the rubbish stuff with us, but they can offer us support and point us back to God. But also celebrate with us in those times of victories, when we have those small wins or even those big wins, that they can be there with us and have that accountability. But also, as a community, we can help each other grow in groups. Either those groups that we said gather around hobbies, those groups that gather around Bible studies, and then we can meet and pray together. It's such a beautiful space to come into church community, to have people who are going to be there to support us. And as we come into these spaces, we find the people that we can learn from. We can find those people who are going to mentor us, who are maybe in those life stages ahead. But also there's a challenge of being those who are the people that we can look to, that we can mentor, that we can pass the baton of faith onto as well. Who are the people that we can encourage, the younger generations? Students here, who are the youth that we can look to say, hey, I know life is difficult. I know it's hard being a Christian as a young person, but keep going. Keep going. Look to God. And finally, when Joshua was speaking to the Israelites, he gave them a choice. He knew it was a hard job to be faithful to God. And he said, look, if you can't do it, that's fine. We can end it right here. But knowing that it was the right thing to do, the people chose to recommit themselves to God. There came a moment where they had to say, God, I'm choosing you again. I'm going to make you the focus of my life. And we have this opportunity here and now today. We have this opportunity to choose God again. Or maybe you're choosing God for the first time. You know that there's been distractions in your life. There's these things that are keeping us away from him. And you want to make that stand to say, no, today is the day that I'm choosing you.